Hey everybody, we're just allowing people to filter in. We'll get started in a couple of minutes. Okay, let's get started. So we seem to have our participants stabilizing, so we're going to go right ahead with proceedings for today. So welcome everybody. This is Black in Neuro Week 2023, and the theme for today is NeuroRacism. So in this session, we are going to look at the impact of NeuroRacism on the mental health of trainees and professionals. This is the second event for today. Earlier, we had a Meet the Experts Journal Club on neuroimaging, which is worth a rewatch on our YouTube channels or other platforms. We are also using the sub-hashtag neuroinclusion for today and looking at the positive stories of including Black people as participants in neuroscience research. So before we get into today's event, I would like to acknowledge the lands on which I reside. As a person living between two countries, the UK and US, I first acknowledge the colonial history of the United Kingdom and other European empires in the displacement of many indigenous people. One such group is the Taino, who inhabited the land of Yamayeko, now known as Jamaica, where my ancestors were forcibly relocated to. In addition, as a current resident of the city of New Haven, I also acknowledge the lands of the Quinnipiac, Paugussett, and Wappinger peoples. We are all joining this event from places around the world, so I invite you to take a moment to reflect on the lands you are joining from, as well as your relationship to those lands and to the indigenous peoples who have and continue to inhabit them. For this event, we also have live captioning and American Sign Language interpreting available. To turn captions on off, click the CC live caption icon along the bottom of your window. You can also adjust the size of the font by clicking on the three dots at the bottom of your window that say More and selecting Subtitle Settings. Our sign language interpreters, Jamie, who then we replaced by Catherine, should appear as a panelist on your screen. As if you experience any issues accessing the captions or interpreters, please message to all panelists in the chat. So we also want to thank our conference sponsors who have been cycling through the video that you can see. They've made this possible for us and allowed us to put these events on for free. We'd also like to acknowledge that this community, which we built 3 years ago, has just reached 1,000 members. This really adds to the importance of this event today, because we really need to fortify and prepare our community as it expands. So let's begin. My name is Deshane, and I'm a Wusa Institute postdoctoral fellow at Yale and BIN co-founder and development director. Welcome to the impact of NeuroRacism on the mental health of trainees and professionals, an event that we have put together in light of the concerning trends that we are seeing within academia, residency, and other professional spaces with regards to the mental health of Black people within these spaces. This will be a frank discussion where we are going to really look at what is going on and the ways in which we can protect ourselves as Black neuroscientists, but more importantly, as Black people. In order to achieve this, we have assembled two amazing panelists for you today. So first we have Dr. Brenda Gonzalez Flores, who has completed her doctorate degree in clinical psychology, the PGSP Stanford Consortium. She specializes in women's health, trauma, chronic pain management, insomnia, substance use disorders, OCD, and perinatal mental health. I think that takes a second. Wow, that's impressive. She is deeply passionate about public health policy and incorporating intersectionality theory into evidence-based practices. She is currently a licensed clinical psychologist in Puerto Rico and co-founder of the Be Present LLC, a telepsychology mental health clinic. And secondly, we have Dr. Azieh Alsop. And Azieh Alsop is an artist, neuroscientist, and psychiatrist who conducts research at the intersection of social cognition and music mindfulness and psychedelics. Azieh went to college at North Carolina Central University and received his MD PhD from the Harvard MIT MD PhD program. While there, he was also an Emerson Scholar studying piano at Berklee College of Music. He completed his residency in psychiatry at Yale and is currently an assistant professor in Yale's Department of Psychiatry and director of the Center for Collective Healing at Howard University. Greetings to you both. So we're going to get straight into it. And I believe, Azieh, you have a presentation for us. So I'm going to hand the floor over to you.
Hey, yeah, I appreciate that, Deshane, and just like the context you set for this with just even the land acknowledgements and really centering those experiences. And I feel also really grateful to be able to speak to this community. And, you know, I think sort of the moment in which this was created has really evolved into a movement and a community. And I think that's really beautiful. I really want to talk with everyone, but I have some slides just to, I think, set some common frame and context, which people may or may not agree with. I think that might be also open to conversation. But I think for me, us kind of starting in this present moment and where we are and understanding that, like for me, I know there's a lot of things happening in the day and we're often moving and our minds really want to either reflect on things that have already happened or move into like what's next, like I have a dinner after this and all those things. So I want to take a few moments to just be present right now as we kind of enter into this conversation so that we could better kind of connect and hear each other. So I want us to all just reflect on this quote from the book For Brown Girls with Sharp Edges and Tender Hearts, because I think it, again, helps to really set a common frame for, I think, what many people's experiences are as people of African descent and in other sort of marginalized groups as they navigate academia. And we'll come back to this quote and some more things from this book as we move forward. I think a lot of what I want to ground us in is some idea of belonging, right? A sense of being secure, recognized, affirmed, and accepted equally, such that full participation is possible. And how does it affect the human psyche to navigate spaces where there's not a sense of belonging? And why is that, detrimental? How do we see that? Also thinking about this idea of white supremacy, which academia is really entrenched in, a belief system that white people are superior to people of color, and that the ideas and beliefs and actions of white people are superior to the ideas, beliefs, and actions of people of color. How does this, frame belonging? And then a really simple definition of racism is a system of unfair advantage based on race. I think there are lots of nuances that we can get into, but this is from the book We the People, which is kind of explaining these concepts to a child. And then this idea of racial stress, or this emotional overload or shock that one has to their coping system before, during, and after racial interactions. And as someone navigating these environments, I know I definitely have been in situations that had this element of racial stress. And I'm sure you've felt what that is sort of in an embodied way. So, I think this idea of belonging can be something that feels pretty ephemeral, but it is really grounded in a neurobiology, right? So there've been all these different sorts of experiments that have been done to show that areas like the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex or the anterior insula are actually activated in social contexts where one feels like one doesn't belong or where one is excluded. And there's like an evolutionary reason for this, right? As humans, early in our development, being a part of a social group was basically, equal to survival. And so the brain co-opted these pain systems that tell you when you have sort of physical injury and co-opted it so that we could have a pain signal to tell us when our status within a certain social group is compromised or where we're, where we might be excluded from that group because, it can be a matter of survival. And so when we juxtapose this with the idea of navigating a racist system where there is this racial stress, this is happening in the brain. And of course, there are sort of optimal levels of performance that one can reach with the right amount of stress. And we do want to, many times in life, move outside of our comfort zones. But I think as people of marginalized communities and working in racist environments, we already are coming in with a certain degree of stress. And I'll kind of show what this does for the actual body and brain. But it's so much easier, I think, for us to feel a certain kind of strain and crisis because we're already operating with a certain level of baseline stress that some of our colleagues may not be operating with. And so I'll just take the rest of the time to just share some general stats that I think, again, could just ground the conversation in some numbers and then share briefly some of the work that, we're doing around this. And so, all of these psychological conditions like depression, anxiety are related to increased risk of coronary heart disease and cardiovascular health and are related to stress. Early life stressors, increased cardiovascular morbidity, and you basically double the risk of having a major cardiac event when you spend more time being stressed, angry, or depressed. There was a study where they basically looked at cardiovascular health score and just rated, from best to worst. And you can see there sort of how it shaked out by race and gender. And then here again, in race, when you looked at perceived discrimination, it had an effect on even diastolic blood pressure. So there's sort of really real impact on physical health. And of course, when we look at actual mortality rates, you can sort of see the ratios here for, different groups. And, we're almost double in certain age categories, 20s through 40s, to have mortality. Not only this, but before we might develop something like high blood pressure, there's already evidence of epigenetic aging. This is from Dr. Holloway. Recent studies showing, that you can see increased epigenetic age in individuals that are Black, and that this is really being driven by increased cumulative stress and increased traumatic events. And lastly, a recent article that sort of summarized some of the recent work basically shows that the structural inequities that we face as we navigate through these systems really have impact on our neurobiology. You can see differences in sort of the way the amygdala responds to threat. And so this is something that we have to really, think about from a structural, perspective, but also from a perspective of community. And as we navigate through structures that are currently racist and aren't going to change tomorrow, how do we actually equip ourselves and each other to deal with this? And so, again, I think one angle from this book, again, I think begins to speak to this, where it says, over time, I also learned to value my background instead of distancing myself from it. I learned to claim it with pride. I learned that integrating myself into American values and ideals made a difference in my ability to infiltrate academia, which is still vastly white and elite. But I also learned that adaptation did not mean I had to relinquish my love for my roots. Again, this idea that I was failing at whiteness, but that didn't make me a failure. I didn't need to assimilate with my white privileged peers. I had to learn survival skills from my BIPOC peers. And I think that's sort of exactly what some of the ethos of what we're doing here is, right? How can we come into community and share with each other's ways to persist if we choose to persist in systems. I think there's also a lot of value in building our own systems. So I think when we think about stress and sort of both the structural components, which we are dealing with in many different ways, and there are policy angles and economic angles that we can take, but there's also just our personal lived experience, and how do we change the way that we are moving through environments that can be harmful and can be stressful. So having psychosocial support, and that can look like a lot of different things. I think therapy is one way that looks, and that can be in a group setting or individual setting, but can be very helpful. Regular exercise, this is such an underrated thing, but it leads to increased levels of BDNF in the hippocampus, prefrontal cortex, and is one of like the best antidepressants, really. There are things like stress reduction training, really having a sense of humor and optimism. It sounds simple, but really taking a certain perspective to a situation can alter some of how that stress impacts us. Altruism, faith, and that can look like a religion, but that can also look like other spiritual paths and practices. Having pets, spending time in nature, music, and mindfulness. I put those two in bold because those are two that I really kind of hone in on from a therapeutic lens and from a research lens for a number of different reasons. But this is sort of a review that was published recently, just looking at how meditation has been shown to actually change the actual structure of the brain. So when we think about something like racism, which I kind of showed you some evidence of, can have impact on areas of the brain like the amygdala, like the prefrontal cortex, how do we then also think about the sorts of practices that may be able to combat some of those changes in the actual neurobiology? I think there's evidence for something like mindfulness and meditation, although it has not been in many cases offered in very sort of culturally competent or inclusive ways. And that's sort of some of what we work on. And so some of the research that I do, a small part of my research is looking at how tools like music and mindfulness can be used for helping with a variety of different mental health concerns like anxiety and PTSD in the community. And we collaborate with community partners to do this. This is sort of just showing you some of our outreach and the way that we target, participants to participate in these studies. Again, some of the imagery that we use to really invite members of our community to partner with us to, deliver tools that might be useful. And just some data to show that, we're finding things like perceived stress can change after 4 weeks as people spend more time listening to these sorts of music and mindfulness sessions. The last two things I'll share is this idea of the 8 dimensions of wellness. It's something that has helped me in terms of just thinking about how to create different structures and community in my life to help me navigate and move through not just a racist academic system, but a racist society, and a society that is harmful in so many other ways, some of which we are unconscious to. And then lastly, I think, a big part of why I'm excited to be able to be in community with you all and speak to you all, because I think I've had the opportunity to be at an HBCU for college and then move through, white academic spaces and feel the difference, and hope to think about ways that we can continue to sort of fortify each other. One of the things that we've done is to get together to produce some music that can help enhance focus, confidence, and motivation as sort of tools that can help you navigate. I'm just going to give an example of that, and you can sort of just take this time to listen sort of with a mindful attention to the different components of the music. This one is specifically designed to help with focus. And also sync your breath to the music in a way that feels comfortable to you. Yeah, so that's an example of it. This is freely available on any streaming platforms if you just type in Me Freely. Again, there's songs on there that helps with focus, confidence, and motivation. You can just sort of, play them in the background. You can mindfully attend to them. You can just use it as an assistance for your own mindfulness practices or yoga practices if you have those. And so I'll stop sharing the screen there. And yeah, look forward to kind of seeing what evolves from our conversations.
Thank you so much, Asia. My mind was already racing. That was powerful. We have a bit of time for questions before we move on to Dr. Boris. So if anybody if the chat does have any questions, they can use the Q&A feature, and we'll be happy to read them out. I think one thing that came across to me, you talked about our community as well, and that idea of that kind of collective healing. And I know that you've done a bit of work at Howard, and you're the director of a Center for Collective Healing. So I wanted to ask if you could shine a bit more light on that, and how probably we could socially work together to heal, especially when we're in spaces that can harm us.
Yeah, so that work is really in very early phases, and part of what is so exciting about it is that it's really being designed in collaboration with the local community there in Washington, D.C. And so but the idea really is, how do we leverage group-based forms of treatment in new sorts of models that really speak to, I think, our cultural ways to integrate things like psychedelics into those sorts of treatment paradigms. And there's a lot of really interesting work being done by people like Monica Williams, looking at how psychedelics might play a role in race-related trauma specifically. But I think there's something really powerful about community, which I think has been a natural part of our experience. I think through the African diaspora and through sort of the slave trade, a large part of our own intrinsic healing systems involved us getting together and singing and chanting and dancing and eating and connecting in ways that allowed us to actually survive and thrive in certain ways. And so I think while there is this degree of trauma, we also have always kind of kept in touch with some of our most innate and ancient sort of systems. And now we're just really trying to repackage them in a modern context, and in a context that's legible to like the academic industry and government agencies like the FDA, so that things can be moved through the current system, even as we look to build other systems.
Great, thank you. So we do have a few questions now. So the first one actually is a comment, so I'm just going to say it out there, because the anonymous attendee has said, beautiful music, I loved when the bass came in, you could really feel it in the body. So that's a comment that Me Freely it's sounding good. The next one is wonderful presentation. Do you have a preference between binaural beats, isochronic tones, and phase locking? Oh, sorry, muted.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I wouldn't say that I have a preference. I think there is viable evidence out there for things like binaural beats, phase locking. And I think it's more just, I think there needs to be more sort of head-to-head studies done to really see where the biggest impacts can be had. Some of the studies that we're about to start doing with EEG will be looking at phase locking index as we have the same samples of music with and without things like binaural beats, and also looking at like how like the auditory steady state response at 40 hertz, how that sort of how having that as part of your music stimuli might even enhance the impacts on areas like the prefrontal cortex and the temporal lobe.
Wow, thank you. So the next question we have in the Q&A says, do you have tips for assessing feelings of belonging in the moment as a small or large group?
Yeah, I think that question requires a very nuanced answer in certain ways. I think the more that one can be embodied in the experience in a certain way and be very mindful about what is happening internally and what sort of psychic structures might be supporting the way in which they're feeling, within a certain environment can help them. But I think in a more simple way, maybe is saying really learning how to trust yourself. So if you're in a room and you are feeling this intuition about like not belonging or feeling a certain kind of energy, I think paying attention to that and beginning to learn to trust your intuition, and gaining more clarity about, when something is intuition versus sort of old habitual thinking, or, there's all these different ways our thoughts and our mind can interface with our emotions and how we're feeling. And so the more that you have a process, I think, of being clear about when you're feeling certain things can kind of build that trust you have in your intuition. But, if you feel uncomfortable, I think that's always something to honor, that you're feeling uncomfortable. And sometimes it's better to remove yourself and then figure out why you were uncomfortable. But, again, it's nuanced. So it really depends on the situation and the group.
Sure. Thank you. So we have another question. Well, there's a few questions in this one. So the first thing is asking, is age a determining factor in the positive effects of meditation and music therapy? I don't know if you.
Yeah. So again, I don't know. There may have been a study done where people really are looking developmentally and comparing them within the same group, but I'm not aware of that. What I do know is that when people have done studies across different groups, so in, elders with dementia, or in sort of healthy adults, or even in adolescents, it seems like music in a number of different therapeutic forms, as well as meditation in a number of different therapeutic forms, has an impact. So I don't know if it, I think there is something about the adolescent brain, and the young adult brain in terms of just the capacity of the brain to sort of generate new neural pathways, that maybe there's an added bonus that you can get if you have something impactful during that time. But yeah, I don't know if anyone has actually looked at that systematically.
Sure. And then the same attendee also asked, what are the biological causes behind such behavior, and how do these causes interact with psychosocial factors?
I guess I would have to know a little bit more in terms of behind what behavior.
Yeah, I think it may have been the positive effects of the meditation. But
yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's like with something like meditation, for instance, where, in a sense, you're almost working certain parts of your brain. So, for instance, the prefrontal cortex, which is really important to be able to attend to certain things, or the insula, which is important for you to have sort of interoception. If you're spending intentional time sort of working those parts of your brain, it makes sense that, the white matter in those tracks begin to increase, and the function sort of changes, the dorsal mode, default mode network, things like that begin to change. So I think some of it is that you're actually sort of exercising and working certain parts of your brain when you're doing, some of these activities. Music is one of the most powerful sort of neural stimulants in terms of the reach that it has to be able to, access areas of the brain. Which is why, in people with dementia, for instance, they can access certain memories with music that they can't access sort of in the absence of music.
Thank you. So I have one final question for you before we move on to Dr. Forrest. And for me, it's just in general. And if you don't feel to answer this, you're welcome not to. But how have you personally navigated with your sense of belonging and feeling within these sorts of spaces and environments?
Yeah, that's huge. And it's a long story that I won't get all the way into, but I think, during my MD PhD program, there were definitely periods of time where I, was not sure that I wanted to continue in academia. And I mean, sometimes I'm still not sure I want to continue in academia, but for me, meditation and mindfulness were a big part of my ability to stop having panic attacks. Me embracing myself as an artist and really beginning to push myself as a professional musician and embrace that as a part of my professional identity was a really empowering thing that allowed me to then, I think, own just my professional brand in a certain way that was necessary for me, because music is a huge part of my own sort of self-therapeutic process. And then community, honestly, like having the type of family that I have, the kinds of friends that I have, I think was a huge part. Like I remember there was a time I was like third year med school, going on to surgery rotation. I think this was around the time of the Charlottesville stuff. And I just like almost had like a nervous breakdown. I was just like, yo, I can't go in here and deal with this bullshit. Like I was just ranting. My friend's just on the phone, like, yeah, I hear you. You'll be fine. You know what I mean? And then actually that story turned out well because I ended up having like a really great conversation with the attending that day and things like that. But, you know, I think those are the sorts of things that have been really important for me, which is part of what gives me the motivation to try to study them and present them in a more academic, again, context, and think about ways to make them more widely accessible in the community. Again, still pairing that with like actual policy work and actual, you know, movements towards not only changing the structural inequities, but like creating our own systems that would just make all of that like not as necessary in that context. Yeah.
Thank you so much, AT. So we're going to go over to Dr. Flores now, Gonzalez first, sorry. And she's going to present to us next. But we are going to go back to you, AZ, at some point, and we're going to have a panel discussion after this. So Dr. Gonzalez Flores, the floor is yours to present.
There you go. I was on mute for a second there. I'm just really excited to be here, and I thank everybody for reaching out to Puerto Rico as well. We're usually sometimes excluded, right? And as you did your introduction, I was thinking about where we're coming from, right? And how we shared something in common in terms of Puerto Rico being a territory, right? And how that can in itself lead to different ways it impacts our mental health, right? So I'm really glad to be here. And I was able to really connect with a lot of things that Dr. AZA also was talking about, especially on the mindfulness part, which is why our name of the clinic is Be Present. It was inspired through that. And personally, mindfulness has helped a great deal. And I'm going to be sharing some of the exercises. We're going to be doing some exercises here with an added component of compassionate therapy. So I'm hoping it's going to be a much help. Let me start share screening my screen. Okay, so if everybody can see that, excellent. So as you know, I'm Dr. Brenda Gonzalez Flores. I'm a clinical psychologist from Puerto Rico and co-founder of Be Present. So I'm going to start with just an exercise. Let me see. Is it not changing? It's just a little bit slow, apparently. Okay, let me go back. Okay, so here we are. So I'm going to invite everybody who's tuning in, right? I'm going to guide you through an exercise. Get in a comfortable position, right? Whatever feels right to you in your chair. And I invite you, right, if it feels right and it feels accessible, to close your eyes or look at, putting your gaze down gently if you can, if, closing your eyes is not accessible. Bringing your body in a particular form that's most compassionate, kind, or nurturing to you. Centering ourselves in this moment. And you are welcome to start taking a few deep breaths. Breathing in and breathing out. Grounding ourselves in this moment. I invite you to start connecting with your body. Our body's stories. Checking in how we're feeling in this moment. Starting from your feet. To your legs. to your stomach, identifying any needs or wants in this moment. Going up to your chest. This is an area where we carry a lot of emotions, and it speaks to us. Tuning into your body's wisdom. Moving up to your shoulders, your neck. Another area where we carry a lot of tension and stress. And finally to our face, our eyes, the window to our soul. Becoming more aware of your body and the power that it can hold. I invite you to send kindness and love. It can even be through the sense of touch. You can put your hand in your chest or another area that's needing nurture, kindness, compassion in this moment. A body part that may have been marginalized. Just sending some love. I invite you to uplift your spine as a sign of your own body's authority and empowerment. Breathe in and breathe out. All right. Breathing in one last time. And breathing out. Centering and grounding yourself. And whenever it feels right or whenever you feel ready, you can open your eyes, returning to this virtual space and room. All right. Thank you for participating in the body scan. This is one of my favorite beginning meditation and mindfulness exercise because it helps us to identify our needs, what our body needs in the moment. Sometimes we go throughout the day just feeling and carrying so much and we don't realize it until our jaw starts hurting or until our back starts hurting, until our body starts crying out, hey, there's a need here. I'm hurting, right? So body scan, you can, we took a couple of minutes. You can take more time. Some people take up to 15 to 20 minutes. Some people do a quick 1-minute body scan, but it's just taking that minute to connect with your body, what your body needs, because it's going to tell you what are your emotional needs and what are your mental health needs as well. So I'm going to continue. So let's talk about academic burnout. What are the signs? How do we know we're heading that direction of where we're feeling burnout, we're feeling very stressed, and we might be needing help, right? And it's so important to start knowing your own signs. And it's not, I'm going to go through three main categories, physical, emotional, and also behavioral. And each person's signs are very different. So as I'm going through this, I invite you, right? Each person here connected in this webinar, just going down the list. What are you feeling, right? What's going on in your life right now? Do you have any of these signs, right? Taking a moment to identify if, what is your body telling you, what is your mind telling you. So let's start with the physical signs. And of course, right, check with your medical doctor, because some of these things might come from a medical condition, but the mind and body are extremely connected, and we know that our emotions can speak through our bodies. So let's start with the physical signs. So headaches can be a sign of burnout, gastrointestinal difficulties, and there's a lot of research that supports that our stomach is our second brain, and there's a lot of serotonin receptors in our brain, in our gut, right? So a lot of people may feel anxiety in the stomach area through constipation, nausea, and among other things. High blood pressure, right? Like how Dr. Alsop was talking about, right? There's a really strong connection between stress and our bodies and our cardiovascular system. Fatigue, if you're finding yourself tired, right? It's really hard to be getting to classes. You're finding yourself just constantly more difficult in terms of energy, not having enough energy. Hyper alertness, feeling unsafe, right? And there's a lot of different social, right, and systemic reasons why this can happen. However, hyper alertness is a sign that, or the constant feeling unsafe can be a sign of burnout. Rashes. A lot of people have come to the clinic and like, I don't know why, but every time I'm stressed, like I just get this huge rash in my legs or my face or my arms. And we do know that there is a connection between stress and allergic reactions or just rashes in the body. Chest pain, which can be, a sign of a panic attack. A lot of people hold a lot of stress in their chest, which is, something I alluded to in the exercise. Sleep difficulties and insomnia, right? They call us we're number one in terms of insomnia in the US, and there's a reason for it, right? But there's a lot of people that have sleep difficulties. Our mind tends to get wild while we're sleeping. Let's go to the emotional signs. Low mood, sadness. You're finding yourself harder and harder to connect with others. You're just feeling sad. Maybe you have moments where you find yourself crying without being able to stop and you don't know why. Feelings of hopelessness or helplessness, right? Feeling trapped, uh, feeling irritable, having low tolerance. Someone might say something to you, you might blow up. Maybe you might get comments like, hey, I've been seeing you're a little bit uneasy or you're on edge. Cynicism, right? Which is the other side of just feeling low. We become cynical, right? There's so much been going on that we can become a little bit more cynical. Problems concentrating, you're finding it really difficult to complete your task, to focus, to even focus on someone talking to you. It's not just academic work, but it's also following conversations. You might feel yourself dissociating. You're talking to somebody and your mind goes somewhere else, and you come back and you're like, what's been going on? Um, um, you might blank out. You might even feel you're like an out of body experience too. Low self-esteem or confidence, right? You start doubting yourself more. You start not believing that you can do things, right? You start doubting your self-worth. It's really difficult to make decisions. It can be even simple decisions such as, what am I having for dinner tonight? That can even become hard to do. What should I do now? How do I tackle this? A sense of just feeling very overwhelmed. Let's go on to behavioral signs. Isolating. This is a really big one we see in therapy. And it's one of like the number one signs that we might be entering a depressive episode, which is you start isolating. You say you're a very happy person and you love laughing, you love connecting, you love exercising, you love music, and all of a sudden you just find yourself just not motivated. You start missing your classes, you stop, they invite you to go out, you're like, no, I don't want to go tonight. know, and you find yourself more and isolating more to your room. Avoidance behaviors, which is in line with isolation, maybe not doing certain things, procrastinating, difficulties completing your ADLs, and that just stands for activities of daily living. That can be showering, brushing your teeth, eating, drinking water. When we're feeling burnout, it's even hard to take care of ourselves, and that's a pretty big sign. I know there's certain sacrifice in terms of like, sometimes we have to study really, really hard, right? But and we might skip a meal. But if this is constantly going for a while and it's harder and harder to eat, to drink water, and take care of yourself, then we're looking at a sign, right? A red sign. Anxiety related behavior, you can't stop biting your nails or plucking, right? We have had other people pluck their hair. Your foot shaking all the time, you're pacing, you're feeling this restlessness, you can't sit still. And sometimes we may use substances or drugs to cope, alcohol to cope, right? Just with the distressing emotions, sometimes become so unbearable, right, to go in our day to day, that we might use different substances to cope with that. These are all signs, right, that we're getting that academia burnout, or we're needing more help, and our mental health is suffering. Okay, so how do we cope, right? What do we do? And I'm just going to present a couple of different coping strategies, right? And I'm hoping we can get through most of it. If anything, Duchenne, you can tell me that I'm close to my time. So the first thing that I tell people in therapy is understand your context. As a clinical psychologist, I can't look at symptoms, disorders, or anything that the DSM presents me without understanding the context, the history, and the narrative of the person. And this is so important to do also at an individual level, because we might be feeling really down, depressed, and we might feel it's because of something, that a deficiency of ours or something that we're lacking, where it's not necessarily that. It's really important to look at your entire context. For example, what are your roles, right? You're a student, right? But you're also more than a student. You probably have a family, right? A family role. Um, any other roles that you're involved. Unique challenges. Also looking at what are your unique challenges. Also looking at power dynamics that happen in academia, right? That can definitely impact our well-being. Microaggressions, right? And sometimes I call these macroaggressions because they're not so micro. They're pretty overt sometimes. And validation, the systemic racism that we can face, right? That leads us to the fight or flight mode, right? Survival mode. Collective trauma, everything that we've been living in the past few years, the pandemic, that greatly impacted our well-being. The political climate, political corruption, all these, everything, right? All this impacts our well-being. So it's really important to understand your context before we dive into anything, right? And that can really help validate our experiences and normalize what we're feeling. Okay. Becoming aware of your inner dialogue. Our thoughts are extremely powerful. They're so powerful, right? So important to pay attention to, how are you talking to yourself? What are you saying to yourself, right? Usually our uplifting, positive, and neutral dialogue doesn't really impact us. I would say keep those, right? Let's not mess with that inner dialogue. But let's become more aware of the other type of dialogue that brings us down, the one that might criticize us, that might shame us, right? Noticing your thought patterns, right? I do this a lot in therapy using cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, amongst other therapies, where we look at your thought patterns and how that can impact your behavior. Working on reframing failure, right? Because failure, when we're not doing well academically, or when we're feeling we're not doing well academically, we might think, again, it's something that we personally can't do and we personally failed. This is why it's so important to understand your context and the unique challenges amongst other factors are impacting. Looking at failure as an opportunity to grow, right? As soon as we start looking at error or not being able to do well as something we can't, as a personal failure, we get stuck, we get paralyzed. And also using the, listening to what is that imposter syndrome voice, right? And there's a lot of research that goes into what imposter syndrome. And there's research saying that minority students have a greater imposter syndrome voice, that we might feel we don't belong there, or we're not capable. It was just given to luck. No, you're there for a reason, right? You got there for your hard work, and you got there because you have the potential and greatness right inside of you. So listening to what is that imposter syndrome voice and diving into that. So let me move on a little bit quicker. Let's get into another exercise, right? So I might just make it a little bit shorter, but these exercises can go forever. So I invite you again to get in a comfortable position, right? In whatever your body just feels right. If that means crossing, your legs, or sitting down, or, uplifting your spine, closing your eyes. And I want to guide you through a compassionate exercise of welcoming home every single part of your body, and just making space and accepting who you are. So I'm just going to guide you through it. So breathing in, grounding ourselves in this exercise, and breathing out. Welcome home to this moment, the only moment of time that we really have. Welcome home to your body, without which you would not be able to be here today. Welcome home to the many parts of your body, all of which are trying their best to promote your wishes and aspirations. Welcome home to your emotions, both pleasant and unpleasant, all of which are constantly trying to teach you something that you need to know. Welcome home to the emotion of shame, the most difficult human emotion, which is also a pure expression of the human wish to be loved. Welcome home to your wish to be loved, the invisible thread that makes sure you stay connected, even when everything else is falling apart. Welcome home to your vulnerability, which is an essential truth of human experience, even when it scares you. Welcome home to your fierceness, the strong arm that protects you from harm, and when necessary, demands equality and fairness. Welcome home to your many identities, including those that have been overlooked or devalued by others. They are all precious and worthy of celebration. Welcome home to your hidden identities, your hidden parts, who yearn to be loved and to be set free. Welcome home to your journey to freedom and to this particular moment, as unfinished as it may be. Taking another moment to connect with yourself and just listening if there's any reactions to what was shared right now. attending to your body and mind. Breathe in and breathe out. Gently opening your eyes, returning to this space in the virtual room. All right. I think I'm almost coming to my time, so I'm just going to go a little bit quickly on this. So what can help? What other things can help? Mindfulness. So we've been talking a lot about mindfulness, its benefits. We just did 2 exercises of mindfulness, and I'm going to send a little bit more resources. There's a lot of free mindfulness apps. These exercises I've been sharing with you are from Christine Neff, Dr. Christine Neff and Dr. Christopher Germer, who are just pioneers in self-compassion work and combining with mindfulness. Mind and body exercises, they are extremely powerful. Connecting with your body has a lot of wisdom. Listen to your intuition, listen to what your body's trying to communicate with you. Setting boundaries, right? And this is really hard. This is extremely hard because sometimes we have to set boundaries with ourselves. Sometimes it's with others, and sometimes it's with people in positions of power, which can become very tricky and very hard. And sometimes we can't do that with people in positions of power because it's unsafe to do. And that's really important to recognize and not feel again or self-criticize ourselves just because we couldn't stand up and say something. We have to understand our context, right? Saying no or saying yes, right? Sometimes we need to say no. Hey, join this club, join this, join that. I had a really hard time when I was doing my PsyD saying no, and I had the fear of missing out. I wanted to be in everything and do everything, but it can definitely lead to burnout. So sometimes we have to say no, and sometimes we have to say yes. Yes to our well-being, yes to resting, yes to our self-care and self-love, yes to our well-being, right? Yes to connecting. And as our last bullet point there, community. Community is so important. It can save us, knowing that we're not alone in this journey, knowing that we are connected, knowing that there's somebody else out there who can be there for us. And community can also be through professional help. We can also be community. That's another resource. Let me move on to, okay, when to seek help. This is really important because sometimes we believe we can do it all our own. And sometimes we do need that extra hand, right? We do need that professional help. When our resources are just drained out because of many different factors, it is important to reach out in safe spaces, right? And there are some great psychologists out there who have been trained and are really knowledgeable and understand how to add context to our therapy, our evidence-based therapies, right? So how do we need to seek help? Functioning. If you're noticing it's really hard to function, right? If the level of intensity, you're feeling emotions very intensely, either way, right? You find yourself lost in thought continuously. There's excessive worry. It's really hard to be present, to focus. Concentration is really difficult. Organizing, you feel very organized, very disorganized, very overwhelmed. And thoughts, right? The thoughts are becoming more constant, those negative thoughts or unhealthy thoughts, those self-criticizing thoughts are becoming more and more intense, right? It's really important to reach out for help. There should be help in the university, but unfortunately not all university spaces are safe. So you can reach out to other people in the community who maybe have received services, or if the organization has a list of providers, that students can reach out to, that will be great too. All right. And I just want to close with this exercise, right? So this is what we call the loving kindness exercise, and it's adapted because sometimes these compassionate exercises are not created right in mind of minority students. It's usually research is includes other populations, right? So it's a little bit adapted. So I'm gonna ask you to, again, get in a comfortable position, whatever feels right to you. Centering into your breath, breathing in and breathing out. Your breath is going to be your central focal point. If your mind wanders, just gently come back to your breath. And I want you to think of somebody. It can be a person, it can be a community, it can be your ancestors. Just bring into mind somebody you can connect with or turn into. Somebody who has represented a compassionate and nurturing role in your life. Now imagine that this person is seeing you, sending you love and care, really understanding what you have been through, holding you with love, care. I will be sharing some phrases with you, and imagine as if this person, this ancestor, is speaking to you directly. May you be safe and protected. May you know your soul's refuge, that inner sanctuary untouched by external circumstances. May you be well. May you listen to the wisdom of your body and soul, telling you what is needed for health and healing. May you love and be loved. May love and compassion warm your heart and soothe your soul. May you know the eternal restorative and transformative power of love to heal, uplift, and liberate us all. May you be at peace. May you find comfort and truth and rest in the stillness of your soul. May you be happy. May you feel your joyful, soulful aliveness rising from the reservoir within. May you sing and dance in a soulful affirmation of life. May you smile in deep contentment. May you be free. May you experience the soulful rhythm and flow of a liberated life. May you be free. I invite you to open your heart, your body, to receive these messages from this loving person or ancestor that they want you to feel and experience safety, liberation, love, and compassion. Breathing in and breathing out. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for participating. Thank you for joining in the exercises. Let me stop screen sharing.
Thank you so much. I have to apologize as well because I actually had a power cut mid exercise. I was that relaxed and everything, just the lights went out as well. But
It's okay.
but no, like between the three exercises, I felt just so relaxed and so changed even in that brief amount of time. So thank you so much. And I think even in some of the comments as well, a few of our attendees also said that they felt the same. So AZA, or Dr. Alsop, if you're with us, if we could have you back on the screen as well. I will just check the Q&A if anyone has any questions directly for Dr. Flores, as Dr. Gonzalez Flores. And oh, well, there's a comment. So I will give this straight away from Angel, who said it was an incredible experience. I think he was talking about the first exercise. During the exercise, I felt strong chills and wanted to cry. And at the end of the exercise, I felt a little headache. I don't know if it's due to the constant accumulation of stress and unexpressed emotions, but it definitely feels different once you finish the session. So I think that just speaks to just how powerful these exercises can be. And I think Angel also had a question. I think that came also after the first exercise, which is, in your experience, are these types of exercises more effective when performed one-on-one or in a group setting?
That's a really good question. There's research that supports both. That for group therapies, it is very effective, to be in a group setting, and group therapies have their benefits, right? Because of the community, not feeling alone, feeling connected. And I would actually adapt the exercises to be more for a group setting. And individual therapy, I also do these type of exercises as well, but they're a little bit different as well. Mindfulness, self-compassion, there's a lot of different exercises. So I think it depends, but they're both equally as effective. And individual practice through apps, online, YouTube actually has quite a bit of resources. You can also do that practice every day at a more individual level outside of the clinical space.
Thank you. Have any more questions in the chat? Oh, we do. So this is from an anonymous attendee who asks, do you have any advice for people in academia who are mixed and dealing with not knowing where they belong?
Yeah. I can identify with that. Sometimes it's hard, right? To, especially if you have different identities to know where you fit in. I would say wherever feels safest, right? And I've been part of different groups that I identify with, even though I may look differently, right, physically, but there have been welcoming spaces. So it's just finding those spaces where it just feels safe, it feels right, and just connecting, not letting that stop if it by name it just sounds different, or we don't know whether they're going to accept this or not. Give it a try. If it doesn't feel right, we'll keep on trying, right, until we find our spaces that we belong. And there are spaces that we belong. Yeah.
Thank you. So we have another question from attendee, as from Diana Lee Ferguson. And she's actually asking, is the script from the last meditation/affirmation available online? She said it's so beautiful and she'd love to incorporate it into her self-care practice. And says,
yeah, I have it right here. I can send it over to you. I can definitely send it over. The last slide, it had my email, but that can be shared as well. And I'll be more than happy to send it over. I'll just send it over to you, and then you can send it to everybody who attended the session, along with other resources as well.
Definitely. Thank you. So yeah, I guess I will open this up more so we can have a bit of a panel discussion for the last 10 to 15 minutes. but I guess both of you touched on this, and just really what we as Black trainees and professionals can do to guard ourselves in these uncomfortable spaces. So it's kind of just a simple question. I think we all know why, but maybe it's maybe we should get into a bit more of the why this seems to be happening in a lot of these spaces. And also actually maybe as a direct question for you, Dr. Gonzalez Provost, in your practices, are you seeing more people that are seeking out help and therapy?
Yeah. So I'll probably talk a little bit, and that Dr. also come in to this question. Yeah, there's a lot of different reasons. This is why the understanding your context is so important, right? It's intersectionally so important to look at when we're experiencing mental health issues or we're feeling that our emotional well-being is being impacted. I mean, we have to be real. There's a lot of microaggressions happening, subtle aggressions happening, racism, prejudice, discrimination that's happening in different levels, right? In individual, right? In a more societal, in a more worldly, political. So this all trickles down to us in academia. Academia is very political. It's a very political environment, and it is going to impact us along with everything else that's happening. There's been a lot of stressors recently. The pandemic, wow, that time of isolation, there's been a spike, at least in my clinic, there was a huge spike of people seeking mental health for the first time in their life because of what they had lived through in the last couple of years. There's been an increase in students. We have a lot of PhD students, a lot of PsyD students, medical students, law students coming into the clinic seeking help because of academia burnout, because there wasn't empathy. There wasn't, hey, I know you're going through a hard time. Maybe we can give you a little more time for you to do your final exams. Hey, like the grant can, like, let's see how we can help you to write that grant. Research, there's a lot of pressure and research to publish peer review articles, and they have to be these really amazing articles, or else our work is not valid. We know that research doesn't work that way. It's very unpredictable. So there's a lot of stress that's coming in at all different angles. And that's just one role. We have many different roles in our life. We're brothers, we're sisters, right? We're mothers, we're fathers, right? We have really different roles in our community. So all this comes together and can lead to the first depressive episode, panic attacks, trauma, right? Among a lot of different other mental health issues that are going on.
Exactly. No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. And I think, again, all of this is happening in context where you may not have, that community support, depending on the department that you're in, or depending on the institution that you're in. You may not have a robust community, which can help to buffer, some of the effects of these things. And so I think that just adds another layer onto that.
Perfect. Thank you. So we have another question in the chat. It's actually directed to Dr. Alsop. This is thank you. So for Dr. Alsop, do you have any advice about prioritizing growth in your personal life, like for someone planning to pursue the MD, PhD path, particularly for women, if you can speak to that at all?
Yeah, I think that it's really important to understand and have clarity about what your values are, and sort of where do they align or not align with the career path that I'm choosing, or the environment that I'll be pursuing this path in. And what that helps to do, I think, is allow you to make better cost-benefit decisions, right? I think sometimes to persist in a certain way might mean you have to take certain risks, or might mean you have to do things in a way that looks different than how your PI did it, or looks different than the way that some of your mentors did it, because you're living a different embodied experience. And so being clear on your values allows you to really navigate some of those conversations in ways that can be, I think, much clearer. And I think, thinking about, family, when do you want to have a family? When do you want to have children? and what are the pros and cons of having that, like doing your PhD years, for instance, or doing residency. I think those are all very individual decisions. But again, the more that you can be clear about what your own personal values are, your spiritual values, your collective values, it will really help you to be able to navigate the cultures that you're in. And I guess that's the other part, is like really understanding the institution or department or culture that you're navigating, and like having people who can help steer you and mentor you when it comes to having certain challenging, conversations.
I just want to add briefly to that, because there's an amazing therapy called acceptance and acceptance and commitment therapy that just goes along that line of knowing the values and knowing, using your values as a form of direction, right, or guidance, instead of just goals, right? Like I need to graduate, I need to publish, I need to do this. It's more of like, where do I want to go? What is important to me, and how to kind of guide yourself. So that just wanted to highlight that. Yeah, there's also in the clinical world, there's a therapy that just speaks to it, to see how powerful that can be.
Thank you so much. Also Diana Lee in the chat says thank you as well. So I have a question, is kind of along those lines of, when you are looking to pursue those pathways, is what, for the both of you, what recommendations would you have for new trainees or those who are considering entering these spaces? Maybe like how to fortify themselves or equip themselves before they get here. I think it's a lot for us that are already in the process, but I think it can be hard for those that are about to come in, because, well, they may or may not be aware of just how uniquely difficult a lot of these spaces can be to navigate.
I would say find community. Immediately find your community. Look for others that spaces you might feel connected to. Don't balance. I would say a big balance, coming with a plan of, trying as best as, as you can, because it is really hard in academia. Academia can be really brutal. Finding that balance of not isolating yourself from the things you love. If you love music, right? Using music and not just putting academia first, also finding that balance. So maybe just before coming in, knowing, like, looking for that community, look for organizations that, might share your values or passion, and making space. I'm a huge fan of exercise. So also I agree in the benefits and mental health benefits of exercising. So if that's something that's part of your care and well-being, continuing that. So it's finding that balance and community, I think, can help navigate some of these spaces. I think is Duchesne frozen on my side. His image froze on my side. I think it might be.
Yes, I believe Duchesne is frozen at the moment. We'll give him one moment to come back, but thank you both. This conversation is incredible. Dr. Gonzalez Flores, the meditation which you guided us through today was fantastic, and Dr. Alsop, the music was truly touching. It was just beautiful. So thank you.
An idea came to my mind as I was listening to your music, which it really, really touched me. It was so beautiful. It was like, maybe we can do a combination of these exercises with the music.
I already have your name written down to contact.
Yeah, that came into my mind. Maybe we can, combine these two powerful elements. And the exercises that I picked for today, besides the compassion element, is there's an empowerment to it, because I do think it's really important to feel empowered in these spaces of oppression when we feel oppressed. So yeah, just adding these different elements to these mindfulness practices can be very helpful.
Thank you so much from both of you. I think this is actually going to bring us to the end of our session. Unless there are any more questions, I just wanted to leave space for y'all to give us any of your final thoughts before we go.
Yeah, I think just continue to be encouraged, be kind to yourself. You know, it is challenging to do what you're doing. So it's not, it's not always going to feel, pleasant, but have the things in place that can help you. And also like never be ashamed to find something else to do that resonates with you more if that becomes sort of your path.
Great. Listening to your voice, right? Listening to your intuition, putting wellness as well, emotional wellness first. I think those things can really help us in the long run, right? Mental health is equally as important as physical health. So also adding that to your daily care.
Absolutely. Thank you both again. And to our attendees of this session, please continue this conversation, this incredible and necessary conversation on social media using the hashtags NeuroRacism, NeuroInclusion, and BINW23. Please tag us and our speakers in this dialogue as we continue it further. And yes, you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.